And that's
So,
and that's the difference between propaganda and literature. Is that when you're writing literature, you're not attempting to correct for something. You're attempting to reflect reality. You are sensing reality, and you're like, I'm going to grapple with the nature of reality. That's how art is created. Art is created by telling the truth. Propaganda is created by attempting to deliver a message. And this is the destroying art. And it's not a small problem, because when art becomes propaganda and young girls and boys who are exposed to these kinds of stories can't tell the difference, then their compass for how to understand how to navigate the world is flawed, because this is why stories exist. You have great stories come because a artist, a writer, an author was able to so perfectly capture some element of reality. Like, they're not attempting to deliver a message, they're attempting to express some truth that they are seeing in the world. And then
mhm.
this then becomes a sort of simulation for the rest of us to be able to enjoy and understand, so that we can mature more quickly and not cause all kinds of problems, especially in our relationships with the opposite sex. I mean, this is one of the basic elements of why literature and stories are so critical, because especially when you're in middle school or high school and you're reading literature and you're trying to understand, how do I form a really dynamic partnership with a woman or a man? And you don't have any practice at this. So usually what you want is you want to have been exposed to, 50 or 100 really good stories where you've seen characters, men and women, like work this out in a way that is really true to life, true to what femininity is, true to what masculinity is. And then you become increasingly skilled, so that when you are encountering in the real life, men and women, in order to form a family and form a dynamic partnership, like you're able to do it without having to destroy relationships or wait until you're 48, and so this is what's at stake. I mean, I can't stand it. I can't stand that we're doing this to another generation by basically feeding them propaganda. I think if we throw enough special effects around it, and then we have the author write, obvious propagandistic messages inside of it, that this is actually a progress in some way. Like, we somehow know, and this is what's so fascinating about kind of what's happened with AI, which, um, when Google came out with their AI, there was, this famous scandal, which is that it literally couldn't generate a white face. Every face was a person of color, and it ostensibly was programmed to somehow believe that anything white was somehow offensive, and so it just couldn't do it. So you'd say paint George Washington, and George Washington was black, and it was just crazy. Now you can imagine what that AI would do if it tried to generate a movie script, which I think that most scripts in the future, I think most authors are going to, if not be like, they're going to use AI at least as a tool to help them accelerate their writing, because AI can generate stories with perfect grammar, and it can understand, really difficult nuanced elements that are hard to create. And so script writers are going to be using these hyper woke engines that are designed and have been programmed to deliver propaganda. And so I think the problem is likely to get a lot worse. And this is why I think a basic thing we need to do is have conversations like this. Like, we need to be able to spot it, and then we also need to take a big step back and understand why this is dangerous and why it's so and it's not that big of a deal in one sense. It's really bad for culture, but thank God we have hundreds of years of amazing classics. And Sydney, I'm glad that you're, taking a classic every season and really getting into it, because I'm beginning to increasingly think that our grandchildren are going to have to basically decide to only read books that are 100 years old or older. Otherwise, they're just going to be exposed to, one propaganda message after another.
Yeah, all my library for to read to my future kids is like super old fairy tales and fables and stuff.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Fairy tales are so amazing, because there's something about how they have delivered some truth over such a long period of time. And the better way to think about fairy tales is that, let's say there were 50,000 or 100,000 fairy tales, and then it just got whittled down to the most true ones, or like the top 10, the top 50, whatever. Like, there's something that really resonated again as true, that caused us to be attracted to that story, as opposed to some some person in a boardroom somewhere trying to figure out how to steer culture and say, we got to compensate for this oppressed people group or this victimized group. And so we've got to like change the script and change the narrative and force storylines around, our engineered goals for certain underrepresented groups in the future. That's just not how you write.